Okay. Where did it begin? A lifetime ago. Or several thousand million lifetimes ago. For all of us. All of us beings. The life urge to find itself, to become conscious. The joy sought in procreation. In life, becoming. The possibility of joy. Mother and father seeking joy with each other. Or one-sided, is still a seeking joy. So from the joy, the union of the sperm and the egg, the constant growth of the cells, multiplying, doubling and doubling, the baby is conceived. Grows and is born, doesn't know what a mother is, doesn't know what it is, doesn't know where it is. All of a sudden the universe, it thinks something's tearing me apart from myself. Birth is happening. Several hours later, or cesarean, baby's placed on mother's chest. Baby doesn't know where he is, doesn't know what's happened to him. Fear was kick-started. Again, something is completely alien to the consciousness that he is. He's aware of himself, but he doesn't know what he is. His consciousness is infinite. It's not restricted by language or concept or identification with form as self. There's no identification. Doesn't name, doesn't have words, no concepts to limit his consciousness. He's free forever. His consciousness is eternal, infinite. Language isn't. Mother talks, father talks, everybody talks. Who is this? Name's him Peter. 3 months, 4 months, he's learning flat out. All he knows is that if he screams, somebody comes, he doesn't know who it is. Recognizes the faces, recognizes that any expression from himself creates an effect in the world. It's learning. His experience is building up like cotton wound around a cotton reel. Ball of wool wound around the first thread of ironess. About 3-4 months, depending on the baby, could be older, starts to crawl or tries to. Any parent has seen the child rocking back and forward, trying to move Might do it for 3-4 days. Week. All of a sudden, he's off. He's figured out how to move the body, the whole body, not just a hand or a foot, or a head or a neck, the body itself. Wow. What do you think clicks? What turns him on? It's the connection between the will and the matter. He figures out how to connect. He learns to visualize. He learns that to get from here to there, he has to visualize going. That connects the will to the body. So he projects a self the I-ness, the I identity is projected. Then he learns that it's fun. Mother puts toys just out of his reach, encourages him. Everyone's encouraging him. Around about the same time, he's putting syntax together. He begins to recognize that his mother's calling the projection Peter. So he begins to identify with the projection as self. He projects it everywhere. And every waking moment from that moment on, he's identifying with the projection as self. He comes to think that the projection is who he is. The thought happens because of the projection. The consciousness recognizes the pulling back. It's like if I say to you, look at an orange in your mind. You stand back and you look at it. What about if you notice yourself noticing the orange? Okay, that's another step, but later. So, baby's projecting himself forward. His body follows his will. There's a connection. He thinks then the will splits away from himself. His infinity of consciousness begins to contract into the projection. And then it becomes that he thinks he is the projection, but there's no unthinking. The reaction in consciousness, in the mind, the reflection causes thought to kickstart. So he begins to abstract. This is the difference, this abstraction. In our ability to abstract is our disconnection from truth. So the baby then projects this body all over the shop. He's unstoppable. Danger! Parents are driven mad, but the baby's having the time of his life. He's found a new toy that he can move about the body. Mummy names it Peter. It's got a label on it. He begins to identify with Peter as self, and he becomes the label, forgets his superconscious infinite being. From that point on, he's left himself. And then he goes through life. Maybe he's got good parents, bad parents, who knows. But the psychological effects begin to wrap around the original cotton reel with all the other stuff. And he begins to think the ego is himself. That's the ego. Before there wasn't one. All the genetic propensities, and it's all in that ball of wool. But he's always projecting it as self. He goes to school and it's reiterated and built on and layered over. Like 20,000 layers of paint. He begins to think he's the paint. But the thought, as I said earlier, is automatic. There's no thinker. You see, I just put a thought in your head. You didn't think it. Here's another one. You did not think. I put it there. Thought is a reaction to perception. Now if I say orange, that pops in your head. Thought arises because of your perception of the orange, then another thought will arise because of your perception of the perception. So perception, our perception is our enemy. No. Our perception is our, let's say, hurdle. It's the wall between us and truth, our own perception. That's the first step. Only the first. So what you perceive as real is not real. Because you're perceiving what's in your mind after it's been perceived, it went to the back of your brain. It referred to memory, came forward to the frontal lobe, then you saw it. You didn't see it before it went back. So it goes into our senses, touching, eyes, sense, hearing, feeling. Goes to the back of our brain. Gets composed all together, locked in together as a composite experience. A perceptive event, we could say. Event. So the brain is very smart. It finds a match in a electrochemical imprint, because perception comes from the nerves, which are electrochemical. So there are electrochemical triggers from this, from a very soft touch, from taste. There's an electrochemical event happens, and it goes back to the back of the brain as a chemical imprint, gets referred to and matched to a similar chemical imprint. And locked into the original chemical imprint in the brain, in the memory, is emotion, because chemical composite equals emotion. So it comes forward loaded with the emotion from the previous experience, it comes to the front of the brain, but while all this is going on, there's more data going in. So the old one coming out matches, rather coincides in event, like in an event horizon in your frontal lobe, and the incoming data gives you the context for the old experience. So that's how perception works. But there's always a witness of this. This witness is you. Thought is automatic, it just happened. You can't stop the brain, stop the mind, they say in a lot of yoga texts. We have to stop the mind, but you can't stop the mind. It is consciousness flowing through us that caused the mind to come into being as thought. I thought, but I didn't think. So I think, but I don't. Anyway, so perception happens. And then we think we're something. We do something, causes an effect in outside us, and it comes back. And we experience it as a validation of our pseudo-self. The pseudo-self is the projected self, the imaginary self, the ego. The idea of I or me. I'm that. See, we say in our mind. We say in our mind, I. Me, over there, that's me. I'm thinking. I feel. I know. I am. I. The I. Capital I, not the I. The I. What am I? I am. What you add after I am, that's what locks you into it. Don't add anything. I am. Okay, so moving back. Perception's happening. Thoughts are arising. It's automatic. Okay? Now, the consciousness, the infinite, omnipresent, omniscient consciousness is flowing through us like neutrinos flow through the Earth or any planet. Neutrinos from the sun, invisible particles of sunlight. Consciousness flows through us like that. The ball of wool catches what's flowing through. It wraps itself around, the consciousness wraps itself around, just like cosmic wind blowing through space. It collects in layers around this ball of wool called I, over years and years and years. So we won't imbibe any information that doesn't relate to the shape of the ball or the nature of I. In other words, we won't listen to, rather, that's the wrong word. We won't, I don't like the word imbibe because it's like eating. I mean, like a layer forms around us. The layer is the shape of it. We won't collect any information that isn't presented in a way that validates the pre-existing ball of wool. If we get all of this omnipresent consciousness, this omniscient consciousness, and we were to get it all at once, the ball disappears. So, as we go through our life, or our several thousand incarnations, whatever you want to say about it, that ball gets bigger until it expands and it loses its finite consciousness. It just keeps expanding, evolving. Just like omniscience does. It has not got a form, it's not got an end, it's omniscient. So the ball of wool that we identify with as self, we'll discard everything else that doesn't go with that doesn't validate it. That's how it works. So we spend our life in this state of referring to this I as self, and later on when we grow up a bit, what happens is the baby's born intact. He's born with a super consciousness, but he compresses that down. But he comes packaged with who he was in his past life. But he doesn't become that until a certain age. Like he fully enters the body, if you like, as the self he was when he died last time. Think of it that way. It's like you get up in the morning, you put on who you are like a suit of clothes. Same thing happens when the baby's born. So he puts on this I-ness over 20, 30 years. And from the point where he died in his last life, in terms of consciousness evolution, when he reaches that point, then he begins to grow again or expand again. But he has to reach that point first. That's why we go through a long period, all of us, of relearning what we already knew. This is the source of deja vu and all those types of things. So when he reaches that point, he usually has some sort of a cathartic experience that kickstarts him into the next level. He might become a meditator, yogi. He might be married for 30 years before he moves. Or he might not move. He might just go around in circles like we do. Our lives, we go. Have you ever noticed a pattern? Goes around like that, comes back, and you learn the same lesson. Until you learn that lesson, you'll keep coming back. Life's like that. That's the way it works. If you don't evolve, you suffer. So after a while, when you get a bit older, you start suffering. You suffer. Every last one of us suffers immensely. All of us. There's not a single person or being on this universe that doesn't suffer for the fact of being limited, for the fact of identifying with the ego as self, or with any identity as self, because that is contraction. And as you wake up more and more, you notice and understand this contraction more and more, and it becomes more and more painful. It's like a splinter in your foot that gets infected, and the longer you leave it there, the worse it gets. Until you're forced, like a tipping point or a critical mass that pushes you ahead. And all of us are evolving But let's leave the personal out of it, because that's the ego. If we remove the ego and there are no egos, there's only oneself, which means that existence is the awareness becoming conscious en masse, right through every level of beingness. So we leave the ego behind. Why you come here today? Find love? To learn to love yourself? To find joy? To find answers? To find enlightenment? No, you're not going to get it. Because the ego can't get enlightened. It's a projection. It's imaginary. It has no self. How can a man who doesn't exist create himself? How can a man who doesn't exist give himself up, uncreate himself? Whoa. You can't. So when the baby chose to identify, he used the will. We can't say he used the will, because the word he refers to the baby. Something used the will to begin to identify. So the key to the whole thing is the will. Not I, that guy over there. Not the ego, me. It's the will. The will is the secret. The will is the key. The will is the flaming sword that turneth every way to keep the way of the tree alive. The will. Your own will is the problem. So when I was in my 20s, I went out in the bush and laid on this giant boulder with all jagged edges sticking up, like this. I took all my clothes off and laid on top of this boulder all day. I wanted to give my will up, using the pain as a reference. 7 hours. Couldn't do it. Couldn't give it up. It suddenly hit me. I'm using my will to do this. My will. I still had this my idea, like I had something, like I existed as something that owned something. Of course I couldn't. So I went home. 40 years later, I found the answer. 40 years. So, remember back in the beginning of our conversation, the baby was trying to figure out how to make the body move. How to connect the will, which is incorporeal, to the physical matter. Visualization, that's how. In other words, create something that doesn't exist to activate something that no one knows what is. You see, we've labelled all these things. We've named everything in the universe. Because we've agreed that's what it is, but it's not what it is, because nobody knows what anything is. You imagine it's a car or a tree or a person. What is it? No one knows. There's no one to know, because the one that would know would be the ego. I know, I'm the ego. Hey. So, how to do this? How to do this? Okay, we'll go there. And that'll be the end of it. A lot of Advaita teachers and non-duality teachers would say, you're not the doer. Stop trying to be the doer. Wait a minute, who's trying? Who's saying? Okay. They'll say, I'm not the doer, hoping you'll get a big epiphany. Okay. So, the I, the ego, being that it's imaginary, can't do anything. Nothing. Put your hand on the desk. See if it'll move. Ask it to move. Beg it to move. It will not, unless you visualize. That's how it works. So who's using the will? So let's leave the body behind. Let's leave the mind behind. Let's leave the thinker and the thoughts behind. Let's just notice that you're noticing your thought. Now I said, you're noticing your thought. So who's this you in the word your? Okay, so it's an idea. It's a subtle I. It's the I you think you are, the mental body. If I yell out loud, it'll be a reaction in your physical body, the hearing, and you react emotionally, and then you begin to think. There's 3 levels of emotion, reaction. Now these 3 are like a triangle. You push one side of the triangle, it affects the other 2. That's how the forces work. So mental, emotional, and physical. Touch you physically, you react emotionally and mentally. You can't get out of this triple consciousness. It's a triplicit force. It's impossible. To try to get out from inside it, it's impossible. But there is a way. I'm going to share it with you. It's like this. If you take one side of the triangle to be negative and the other positive, and the base to be the plane upon which the 2 sides affect each other, like a pendulum. Right? So if you press one side, the pendulum swings the other way. If you press the other way, it swings the other way, across the plane on the bottom. Physical reaction. In other words, what you'll experience is your physical life. So we go through our lives as this triplicit being, emotional, mental, and physical. We're not going to go into details like the yogis do about vasanas and all those words. It can only confuse us. So we're Westerners. We're not yogis. We're not Indians. We don't speak Sanskrit. So we'll find out how it works with physics. It's easy. Like this. If you push one thing one way, where you're moving from is negative. Where you're moving to is positive. So whichever way you move it, you're creating the opposite force. You can't get out of that. Okay? So this position is negative in context of that position. That position is negative in context of this position. So they're both negative or positive. So, how do you get rid of this? Whichever way you go, you're buggered. Okay, here's how you do it. Don't try to be positive. Don't try to fix the negative. Let both go. Bang. The triangle collapses. No more triangle. Don't try. Give up. Surrender. How to surrender? Who surrenders? There's the question. Back to our will on the rock. Aha! Now we have the answer. Who chose to move the baby? Who chose to contract his consciousness? Who chooses to love? Who wants joy? Who seeks himself? God? Who's God? What God? Which God? Us humans have been trying to define God since we exist. We don't know. We don't understand. We have words, names, learnings, doctrines, all of it. What's the answer? I have to come at this a little obliquely. It's easy. Every being has a sort of consciousness of some degree, some form, some awareness of something outside their body or whatever shape it is. Whether it's a germ, an amoeba, single-celled organism, a cat, dog, dolphin, whale, whatever, us. We have an awareness outside us of the world. Because our physiology, our biology reacts to stimuli. Whether it be reacting by having perception like we do, or a chemical reaction like a single-celled organism does, it's still a reaction to exterior stimuli. So, perception is the result of the stimuli, whether perception be a chemical reaction in a single-celled being or an electrochemical reaction in us. It's the same thing. It's a chemical reaction. Triggers the chemicals, hormones get created, they race to our brain, tell us what's going on, and we wake up, hello, there's a car coming, better get off the road. So, this consciousness that's aware of every reaction in every being, let's see where it is. Okay. Atomic physics knows about atoms. We all know about atoms now. We won't go to quantum particles. Just to make it very simple, we'll say atoms. So every part of the atom spins around, but they've found out different things now, but we'll say with the atoms, just for the sake of the conversation. So, electron, neutron, proton spinning around the nucleus, so-called, perhaps. Sometimes there, sometimes isn't. That's quantum physics, won't go there. Let's stay with the atom model. It's easier. So, they can't spin around a nucleus unless there's space in there. So we've discovered that there's more space in the universe than matter. Scientific fact. Now, the space between my hands, right? It's oxygen atoms. My hands are atoms. Let's remove the oxygen. There's still space. Remove my hands, there's still space. Bring it back together. Let's just talk about the space. The space in the atoms in the oxygen in my hands is contiguous. It doesn't break at the edge of my skin or at the beginning of the oxygen atoms. That space is contiguous. Runs everywhere. It's omnipresent in the whole of existence. It's in our brain. It watches our thoughts. It's the infinite consciousness we lose as a baby by identifying with the projection as self. Some people call it awareness. It's conscious of consciousness. It's conscious prior to consciousness. It experiences life and being. It experiences consciousness flowing through us. Thoughts, feelings. It knows itself. It knows it exists. It knows it is. But it doesn't know what it is. Because it doesn't know about words. It doesn't care about words. To it, they're irrelevant. Descriptions, shapes, forms, projections, imaginations. Irrelevant to you, to the true you. Let's see if we can see this true you. Okay, here's a go. Okay. Close your eyes. Okay, close your eyes. Just watch your breath. Just watch your breath. Watch it going in and out. This splits the will from the mind and the matter. Watching the air, going in, watching the breath. Just watching the breath. So now you're in your will, just watching the breath as the will. There's no you there, there's a will watching it. So we've occupied the mind by this thought. So just watch your breath. Now, bring your attention to just behind your eyes, inside your head. Inside your head, keep your eyes shut. Don't look out of your eyes. Put your attention inward. Now think of an orange floating in nothingness. Just an orange, beautiful orange, nothing else, no tree, no nothing. Don't let the mind wander off on thoughts. Just bring it back to the orange. Think about the orange. I put that thought there. Remember that. You didn't. So, notice that you're noticing the orange that I put inside your head. Now, notice that you're noticing yourself noticing the orange. And notice yourself noticing, you're noticing yourself noticing the orange. Stepping back, you see, 3 levels. behind the mental, emotional and physical being, back into the truth of your own being. Now in that state, see if you can find the end of you in that space. Okay, now what we're going to do, we're going to remove the orange, but we're going to hold on to the space it was in. So, okay, remove the orange and hold on to the space. Now, can you get away from yourself? You know where you are? No. You know you are, that's for sure. What are you? You have no clue, no name, no form, no limitation, no identity. You're not human, you're just some awareness. You're aware, your beingness. Now that space is a space that's omnipresent. Space is conscious. It is what's conscious. There is no self in us. That space is infinite being. They call it the Brahman, awareness, the self, God, the original consciousness, all those things. Words, we don't know what it is just is, it's you. It's the same self in all of us, in every being that exists and will exist and has existed. It's the same self in every form of being and life, on every plane of existence, dimension, world, race, colour, species, and every individual in every species, no matter the difference, it's the same consciousness. And this is how God is omnipresent and omniscient, because he's the knower that knows everything through every being. And some of that is omniscience. And the omnipotence is the will that motivates everything. It's the will that seeks love. It's the will that seeks joy. It's the will that holds up existence itself. Food for thought, eh? I think we'll leave it there. Thank you. Namaste.